The dog hit the door before anyone else moved. Not the handler, not the two MPs who'd been standing by the elevator since 0400, not the duty nurse at the desk who'd already called security twice that night. The Belgian Malinois, lean and dark-muzzled, with a chest like a barrel and eyes that missed nothing, launched himself at the supply room door the moment the handle turned from the inside, and the sound he made wasn't a bark. It was something lower, something that made the air feel thin. Sergeant First Class Decker, the handler, a quiet man from Spokane who'd worked with the dog for 4 years, grabbed the harness with both hands and leaned his whole body into the pull. Ghost. Ghost. Down. The dog didn't go down, but he stopped pressing forward. He stood at the end of Decker's grip and stared at the door with every muscle locked, his breath coming in short controlled bursts like a machine, idling hot. The supply room door swung open. A woman stepped out, holding a box of saline bags. She was maybe 30, with short dark hair that was starting to come loose from its clip, and she had the kind of stillness in her face that people develop when they've been yelled at enough times that panic stopped being useful. She looked at the dog. She looked at Decker. She looked at the MPs. "I needed saline," she said. Nobody moved. "For the patient in 412, she added. "Dr. Yarborough ordered it at 0350. There's a note in the chart if you want to check." Decker said nothing. Ghost's gaze hadn't moved from her face. The woman shifted the box in her arms and looked down at the dog for a long moment. Not afraid. Something more careful than afraid. "Hey," she said softly. Not to Decker, to the dog. Ghost's ears didn't flatten. His growl didn't stop. But something changed in the tension of his body, a fractional adjustment, like a compass needle that can't quite find north. The woman turned and walked back toward 412 without waiting for anyone to clear her. Her name was Sloan. No, not Sloan. That was the charge nurse. Her name was Tyne. Tyne Harker. 31 years old, ER rotation, 6 years out of nursing school, 3 of them spent at a Navy hospital in Jacksonville before a transfer request brought her to Bethesda in February. She had a face that looked young until you caught it in profile, and then you could see something older in the set of her jaw. The particular fatigue of someone who had learned to do hard things without making them look hard. She set the saline bags on the counter inside 412 and looked at the man in the bed. He'd come in through the emergency bay at 23:40 the night before. Blunt trauma to the chest, 2 cracked ribs, a laceration along the left forearm that had required 14 stitches, and a subdural hematoma that the neurology team was monitoring with the kind of careful patience that meant they weren't sure what was going to happen next. He had no ID on him when he arrived. The MPs had shown up at 0100, the dog and Decker at 0220 without explanation, and the charge nurse, Sloan Park, who had been at Bethesda for 11 years and did not rattle easily, had come to Tyne at 0230 with the particular expression she wore when something was above her pay grade. "Don't ask questions about 412, Sloan had said. "Just keep him stable." Tyne had nodded and asked no questions. Now she checked his monitors, adjusted the IV line, and stood at the bedside watching the slow rise and fall of his chest. He was big, the kind of build that came from years of actual use rather than a gym. And even unconscious, there was a quality to his stillness that felt deliberate, like a man who had trained himself to be quiet. His left forearm, the stitched one, lay outside the blanket, and Tyne looked at it without meaning to. There was a tattoo just below the crook of his elbow. She didn't read it. She looked away. She made her notes and left. By 0600, the day staff had started to arrive, and the hallway outside 412 had the particular buzzing quality of people who knew something was happening but not what. Tyne had been on for 12 hours. She had 4 more before relief. At 06, a man in a gray suit came off the elevator and walked to the nurse's station with his badge already out. He had the kind of face that was hard to clock. Not young, not old, no strong features, the sort of face that would be difficult to describe later. His badge said NCIS. "Special Agent Morin," he said. "I need the nursing staff list for the overnight shift on the 4th floor." Sloan looked at him the way she looked at everything, steadily, without expression. "You'll need to go through administration." "I've been through administration," Morin said. "They sent me to you. Then they gave you wrong directions," Sloan said. "HIP doesn't have a carve-out for badges, Agent Morin. Patient-adjacent records still go through the privacy officer." Morin looked at her for a moment. Then he said, I need to speak with whoever accessed room 412 between midnight and 0600. Sloane's expression didn't change. I'll let administration know. Tyne heard this from the med room and said nothing. At 0730, someone came into 412 who wasn't supposed to be there. Tyne was in the hallway when it happened. She'd stepped out to get a secondary chart from the station and was walking back when she saw a man in scrubs pushing a linen cart stop outside the door. He wasn't from the laundry service. She knew the laundry staff by sight, had known them since February, knew the schedule, and his scrubs were the wrong color. Bethesda used navy blue for housekeeping. These were gray. She kept walking. She passed him at a normal pace, card-badged the door, and went inside. She said nothing to him. She closed the door behind her. She stood for a moment with her hand still on the door handle and looked at the man in the bed, still unconscious. Monitors unchanged, IV intact. She moved to the window and looked at the reflection of the door. Outside in the hallway, she could see the blurred shape of the linen cart. It wasn't moving. Tyne went to the bedside call panel and pressed security, then let go of it and picked up the patient chart and stood there reading it with professional calm while her pulse did something she didn't want to think about. Ghost heard the cart move before security arrived. The dog's bark, the first actual bark since he'd arrived, came through the door like a thunderclap, and by the time the MPs got into the hallway, the man in gray scrubs was already at the stairwell door. They had him in 40 seconds. The linen cart had a false panel in the bottom. Tyne didn't learn what was in the panel until later. At 0900, Agent Morin came into 412, not alone. There was a second agent, a woman, younger, with a name Tyne didn't catch, and Decker with Ghost, and a man in a navy uniform with 4 stripes on his sleeve who stood by the window and looked at everything in the room with the expression of someone recalculating. Nurse Harker, Morin said. That's me, Tyne said. You called security at 071 Yes. Before the dog reacted. Yes. Morin looked at her. How did you know something was wrong? Tyne considered the question. Wrong color scrubs. Wrong size cart for the linen run scheduled at that time. The way he was standing, he was watching the door handle, not his cart. She paused. I've worked trauma wards for 6 years. You learn what doesn't fit. The 4-stripe commander, she still didn't know his name, said without turning from the window, You served. It wasn't a question. Tyne said, My father did. And my brother. The commander turned then. He looked at her for the first time, really looked, and his eyes went to her left arm. She was wearing short sleeves. It was warm in the room. On the inside of her left wrist, in thin dark ink, were 4 lines of a cadence her brother had taught her when she was 9 years old, sitting on the back steps of a base house in Pendleton while he tied his boots. She'd gotten the tattoo the week after his funeral. She hadn't covered it since. The commander looked at it. His face did something complicated. Which unit? He said. 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines, Tyne said. He was a corpsman. The room went quiet in a way that had texture to it. From his position near the door, Ghost made no sound at all. But Decker, who had been watching the dog for the last 9 hours, noticed that the Malinois had lowered himself. Not lying down, but lower, his sternum a few inches closer to the floor, his eyes still on Tyne but without the locked readiness he'd been holding all night. It was, Decker would later say, the closest Ghost came to sitting quietly for anyone he didn't know. The man in the bed woke up at 11:40. Tyne was there when it happened. She'd taken a short break and come back, which was not standard, but the charge nurse hadn't said anything about it. He came back the way people did after head injuries sometimes, not gradually but suddenly like a door opening, and then he was looking at the ceiling with clear eyes and the first thing he did was try to sit up. Don't, Tyne said. He stopped. He turned his head toward her voice, and his eyes were the gray-green of deep water, and they were very sharp for someone who'd been unconscious for 15 hours. Where am I? He said. It wasn't a question. Bethesda, she said. Naval Medical Center. You came in last night. He looked at the IV. He looked at the monitors. He looked at the door. Dog's outside, Tyne said. Something in his face shifted. Ghost, is that his name? Yeah. He let out a slow breath and lowered his head back against the pillow. He okay? He's fine. He's been here all night. The man was quiet for a moment. Then, who called him in? I don't know, Tyne said. He was here when I came on at midnight. He looked at her again. You're the one who called security this morning? Yes, before the alert. Yes. He studied her with an attention that she recognized. It was the same quality of attention she used when she was trying to determine the severity of something. Diagnostic. Precise. "What made you look twice?" he said. Tyne told him the same thing she'd told Morin. He listened without expression. When she finished, he said, "You trained." "My family was military," she said. "I grew up on bases." He nodded once, very slightly, and looked at the ceiling again. "Corpsman?" he said. Tyne paused. "My brother was." He didn't say anything for a moment, then he said, "Which hospital?" She understood what he was really asking. "He didn't make it back," she said. The man closed his eyes. "I'm sorry." It was 2 words and it wasn't enough, but it was the right 2 words in the right order, and Tyne had heard enough wrong condolences over the years to know the difference. "What's your name?" she said. A pause. "You can call me Roan." Not his full name, maybe not his real name. She didn't push it. "Okay, Roan," she said. "You have 2 cracked ribs, 14 stitches in your left forearm, and a subdural hematoma we're watching carefully. You're not getting out of bed today. Tomorrow? We'll see what tomorrow looks like." He almost smiled. It didn't quite make it to his face, but she could see it in the effort. Morin came back at 1300. He wanted to speak to the patient alone. Tyne stepped out. She stood in the hallway with Decker and Ghost and listened to nothing, because the room was soundproofed in the way that rooms with certain kinds of patients were soundproofed, and she looked at the dog. Ghost looked back at her. He was sitting now, actually sitting on his haunches, with his tail making a single slow movement against the floor. Not wagging, more like acknowledgement. "Hey," Tyne said. The dog's ears moved forward. "I know," she said. "I know." Decker, who had been awake for 32 hours and had the silence of a man past conversation, looked at her sideways. "He doesn't do that," he said. "Do what?" "Settle. Not for people he met in the last 12 hours. Tyne looked at Ghost. "He's a good judge of character," she said. Decker seemed to consider this with the gravity it deserved. "He is," he said, "usually." At 1440, 3 things happened in rapid succession. The first, the man in gray scrubs, the one security had pulled from the stairwell, was identified. He was not a hospital employee. His badge was a fabrication. The panel in the linen cart had contained a device that Tyne was not given the full description of, but which Agent Morin described, with minimal expression, as a problem. The second, the commander with 4 stripes, she learned his name was Beckett, though she suspected this was also a call sign, came back to the floor with 2 more people in suits and had a 40-minute conversation with Morin that Tyne watched through the glass wall of the conference room without sound. The third. Roan's blood pressure spiked. Tyne was in the room when the alarm sounded. He was conscious, and he was trying to get the IV line out of his arm. "Stop," she said. "I need to be moved," he said. "This room is—" "I know what this room is," she said. "Stop." He stopped. He looked at her. "They got the man in the hallway," she said. "This morning. He's in federal custody. There's no one else we know of." "There's always someone else," he said. "Maybe," she said. "But you're not moving until I say you can, and I'm not saying that right now, because your blood pressure is 168 over 110 and you have a hematoma we haven't finished monitoring." She met his eyes. "Okay?" He held her gaze for a long moment. The monitors beeped. "Okay," he said. At 1700, Beckett came into 412 alone. Tyne was charting at the window. He stood in the doorway for a moment, looking at the patient, and then he looked at her. "How long have you been on?" he said. "Since midnight." He nodded. He looked at the tattoo on her wrist. "His unit worked with corpsmen out of Pendleton," he said. 2019. Tyne looked up from her chart. "Your brother's name was Harker," Beckett said. It was not a question. "Owen Harker," she said. "Yes." Beckett was quiet for a moment. "He pulled 4 men out of an engagement outside Marja," he said, "including the team lead. Took 3 rounds doing it." Tyne set the chart down. "The team lead," Beckett said, and then he stopped, and he looked at the man in the bed, and the silence in the room was the kind that sits in the space between 2 facts that haven't yet connected. Tyne looked at Roan. Roan's eyes were open. He'd been awake the whole time. He was looking at the ceiling with the expression of a man who had been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and had just been told he didn't have to anymore. "He knows," Beckett said quietly. "He's known since he heard your name." Tyne set down her pen. She looked at the tattoo on her own wrist, the 4 lines of cadence, her brother's handwriting rendered in ink, and then she looked at Roan. He turned his head toward her. "Owen talked about you," he said. He said you were going to be a nurse, he said. He stopped. He started again. He said you were the one who kept the family together. Tyne said nothing. There wasn't anything to say that wouldn't sound like less than what it was. I looked for you after, Roan said. I wanted to. I didn't know how to. He stopped again. I'm sorry. I've been trying to find the right words for 4 years, and I don't have them. You don't need them, Tyne said. It came out quieter than she intended. She didn't take it back. Outside the door, in the hallway, Ghost made no sound. But Decker, looking through the small window in the door, saw the dog stand up from his sit and pad 1 step closer to the door and then stop, ears forward, tail low, every line of his body oriented toward the room with an attention that had nothing threatening in it anymore. Just focus, just witness. Just a dog who knew, with the certainty animals sometimes have about such things, that the most important part of the last teen hours had finally begun. Tyne stayed past the end of her shift. Nobody told her to leave, and nobody told her to stay. And the way those two silences worked together left her in the chair by the window while the evening light went flat and then blue and then dark, writing notes she'd already written, not going anywhere. Roan slept. Ghost slept too, eventually, not lying all the way down, but low on his sternum in the middle of the hallway, blocking the door in the way he'd been blocking it since 0220. Except that now it didn't look like guarding. It looked like keeping watch over something worth watching. At 2100, Sloane came by and looked through the window and then looked at Tyne and said nothing. She handed Tyne a coffee through the door. Bad coffee, machine coffee, the kind that tasted like the building, and Tyne took it without speaking. At 2130, Roan woke up again. He didn't try to sit up this time. He turned his head toward the window and then toward her, and he said, "You're still here." "I had paperwork," Tyne said. He looked at her with the gray-green eyes and the diagnostic attention and said, "You don't have to stay." "I know," she said. He was quiet. "He used to write to me every week," Tyne said after a moment, not to fill the silence, because it was true, and the room felt like a place where true things could be said without them falling wrong. Even in the field, he'd find ways. Sometimes it was just a line or two. Sometimes it was 3 pages on a piece of torn MRE box. Roan said, "He wrote about you." "He wrote about all of you," she said. "He didn't give me names. But he wrote about." Started again. "He wrote about a team that took care of each other, that nobody got left." Roan looked at the ceiling. "He left," he said. The words came out flat in the way that grief that's been compressed for too long comes out flat. "He didn't choose to," Tyne said. "No," Roan said. "He didn't." The monitor beeped. Somewhere down the hall, a door closed. The building settled into its night sounds, the particular quiet of a hospital at 2130, which wasn't really quiet at all but had its own steady hum, its own rhythm, like a large animal breathing in the dark. "He was the best corpsman I ever worked with," Roan said. "He was also one of the most stubborn human beings I've ever met in my life, and he ate peanut butter straight from the packet with his finger like an absolute savage, and he cried at 2 movies in 1 deployment and pretended he had something in his eye both times." Tyne laughed. It surprised her. The sound of it, the realness of it, coming out of a day like this one. "Which movies?" she said. Roan almost smiled again. This time it made it all the way. "I'll never tell," he said. "That's between me and him." Tyne looked at her wrist, the tattoo, the 4 lines. "He would have liked that you kept it," Roan said. She looked up. "The cadence," he said. "He'd have liked that." Tyne looked at him. She thought about asking how he knew which cadence it was, whether he'd read it, whether he'd recognized it, or whether he'd simply known the way people who've lost the same person sometimes know things about each other without being told. She decided it didn't matter. "Yeah," she said. "I think he would have." Roan closed his eyes. His blood pressure on the monitor read 122/78, down from 168, steady, calm. In the hallway, Ghost shifted on his sternum and put his head on his paws and sighed once, deeply, the way dogs sigh when they have decided that everything is going to be all right and have chosen to rest in that certainty. Tyne sat in the chair by the window with her bad coffee going cold in her hand, and the night moved around her, and she'd not feel like leaving, and so she stayed.